Imam. Hello, Imam Sadin. Could you please, it sounds like your mic is good, but can we get a mic test and also video check just to ensure everything is well? Perfect. Mic is working. Will you be showing your video at this time? You might have to flip camera. That's okay if you need to. And also, welcome also as well too. Joining today. We're also waiting for one other speaker joining us today. I do see a camera. It looks like it's pointed elsewhere. Reverend Sims, welcome. At this time, we're just doing some preliminary mic checks. So if you'd like to go ahead and test your audio and also video just to make sure everything is working, please do so at this time. And also, welcome to RFUSA's event for today.
Thank you. Yeah, this is my audio check.
Wonderful. Likewise, we'll be starting in 2 minutes. I'll make an introduction and then we'll get on with today's event. Thank you all for joining. All right, well, we'll be getting started at about 1:05. We'll start in about 4 minutes, so everyone can get situated with their cameras and whatnot. Again, we'll start at 1:05, or about in 4 minutes. Thank you so much. Okay, let's get started at this time. It is 1:05 Pacific Standard Time. I'd like to greet everyone by saying hello, concerned citizens, advocates, and leaders. Welcome to today's webinar hosted by Religious Freedom USA. My name is Camilo, and I'll be your MC for today's event. Now, on behalf of the Religious Freedom USA team, we'd like to begin by giving a heartfelt welcome to today's panelists and those who are listening to today's webinar this very afternoon. Wherever you're joining in from, we have people from all over joining in today. We truly thank you and are glad to have you here at this time. I do hope and trust everyone is doing well. I hope that we can even say hello to each other after the fact. And let this not just be our only meeting, but we can even give one another a smile and a thumbs up at this time. I'm inspired really to see many people joining us from all over the nation. with the hopes that we can continue to strive this year, working together. There's about 2 months left, right? Let's confront the issues that have yet still to be, even though there are some holidays coming up, respectively. Even though this pandemic has carried on, there's still work that we can do even from our very seats. And with that being said, I hope that we are all gathered here for one purpose, of course, to learn how to overcome religious bias for all groups of people. Now, really, our goal for today is promoting unity through overcoming misunderstandings. When it comes to one's perception of religion, that's why we'll be having a fruitful discussion on today's webinar with, of course, the theme of in the importance of religious literacy. Unfortunately, many news stories, depending on whichever news outlet, have been surfacing regarding the injustices done to a variety of specific groups. A couple months back, for example, even with the commemoration of 9/11 in the month of September, Islamophobia has been on a rise and has caused stereotyping and misconceptions of people and their actions. Furthermore, vandalism also has been on a rise too, as well in the Buddhist temples as a result of violence against Asians in response to coronavirus. This then becomes the question, why? What is the root to these problems and actions? And what can we do to foster a dialogue to achieve understanding? That's why we're here today with our distinguished panel speakers and audience members to instill change in learning from one another first, and hopefully spreading that positive change to one another. So with this in mind, let's warmly introduce our speakers for today. Our first speaker, who will be coming up shortly, is Imam Sadinaji from the Islam Center of Bowling Green, Kentucky. Who will be speaking after that is, of course, Reverend Mckinley, who is from the Unitarian Universalist Church of the Restoration. For all those in attendance, let's give a round of applause for spending some time with us this afternoon. Really, they could have been doing anything, helping their own congregation, leading, at their respective places of worship. But you know what? They're here joining us in the RFUSA event to talk about the importance of religious literacy. So let's also please do respect their time as well. Now, before we begin, I do want to remind our distinguished panelists, you will have 7 minutes to speak on your topics. Once you reach the 6-minute mark, you will hear my voice giving you a 1-minute warning. So if by 6 minutes you hear my voice, don't worry, I'm not trying to interrupt, but it's just to give you a 1-minute warning. But at this time, let's go ahead and welcome up our first speaker. If we can cue the board at this time. Yes. So our first speaker for today will be Imam Sadinaji, of course, one who hails from Bosnia-Herzegovina. He came to the USA in 2007 as an imam at the Islamic Center of Bowling Green, Kentucky. Can speak Bosnian, Croatian, and the Serbian language. As we can see, this is a gentleman who is very multilingual, and I'm sure serves various communities. Graduated from the Islamic University of Al-Azhar in Cairo, and he studied comparative religion for many years. And at this time, I'd like to welcome up Imam Sadinaji. Thank you so much, Imam Sadine. Can you hear me? Can everyone hear me okay now? You know, that mute button, it gets everyone. We will reserve questions right at the end after both speakers. I do believe our attendees will probably have some questions, as they do every event, which is pretty awesome. We always encourage questions from our audience members, so I'm sure they'll have some things to ask as well too. But I do appreciate you speaking about this importance of religious literacy, and I think what it stems from what you mentioned about the Quran, talking about not only just the importance of understanding one's own religion, but seeking after and understanding about everything. And I think that search for knowledge is quite crucial, because I think a lot of what I've experienced, even in my group of previous friends, what can occur is the leaving of one's religion, because only focusing on the corruption, only focusing on what might be happening in the world. But I like that you mentioned, as far as knowing and carrying out is actually the solution to that. So it begs me to think then, oh, well, are people knowing, but then are they actually carrying out, right? Mm-hmm. In either respective religion, doesn't matter which one. So that actually got me to really think a lot about that topic. Thank you again for sharing. We'll go ahead and welcome up our next speaker, and that would be Reverend Mckinley Sims. And he's a graduate of the College of William and Mary and Princeton Theological Seminary. Of course, prior to joining the Unitarian Universalist Church of Mount Airy, he worked as a psychiatric chaplain and a minister in Washington, D.C., serving as a middle school basketball coach and English teacher for students at a small independent school in New Haven, Connecticut. Currently living in Philadelphia with his partner and their newborn. Congratulations. And this time, let's welcome up Reverend Sims.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here, and I apologize if you hear any baby noises in the background. Our little one is waking up from a nap, and my wife has him upstairs. So it has been one of those days. I'm so glad to be here. Shukran to my brother, the Imam. Thank you for sharing about the pursuit of knowledge. So I think I'll share a little bit from my perspective on if the reasons why we're to pursue different kinds of religious literacy and knowledge. I think I'll talk about what we ought to do with those pieces of knowledge and with our religious literacy. So I serve in a Unitarian Universalist congregation here in Philadelphia. And if you're not familiar with that tradition, it comes from the liberal Protestant end of Christianity, but it has morphed and kind of evolved into what we call a living tradition. So we draw from multiple religious sources of inspiration. So the joke is, when you walk into a Unitarian Universalist congregation on Sunday, you'll find an atheist, a Buddhist, and a Christian all worshiping together under one roof. It's a really beautiful and really challenging tradition to be a part of. And I'm honored to be at this little church we call Restoration here in Mount Airy. We're a multiracial, multicultural, multi-generational church. And apart from all the various diversities you might find just from the languages we speak and what our skin tone is, we also bring this added diversity of religious traditions, right? So it's not like if you're going to a Methodist church, you can expect 99% of the people to be Methodists, right, or Methodist leaning. When you walk into a UU congregation, you don't know what you're going to get. It's like a box of chocolates. So for us, religious literacy is so important, just to find ways to connect and make relationships within our own congregation. What we do at my church is we offer sacred text studies as one example of seeking knowledge, where we will look at Christian scriptures, Jewish scriptures, look at the Quran. We've been studying Zoroastrianism as a historical effect. And then we have folks who identify as Buddhist who will bring sutras to us. It's really, really lovely. The reason that I push religious literacy in our congregation is not just so that folks will get to know the person next to them in the pews, but it's also so that they will learn how to speak a different language theologically, how to speak to different philosophies and religious traditions, not just so that you can have a conversation at coffee hour, but also so when something bad happens in your city, when there is some kind of traumatic event in the world, we draw upon our religious traditions and we draw upon our congregational communities to find resilience and to find grounding. And if you don't know what the person next to you finds meaningful, what kind of theological language they use, what their imagery and language for God is, then you're sitting next to someone, but there's no way for you to connect. So in order to build resilience together, to respond and find hope and meaning in times of traumatic events and in times of crisis, you have to have some foundation of religious literacy. In UU congregations, we often find two dominant strains from religious traditions. Oftentimes you'll get people who are Christian light, Christian-ish, or come from Judaism, progressive forms of Judaism, and who don't really identify with that anymore, but vaguely theistic, we call it. And then you'll have folks who identify as atheists, agnostic, or humanist. And oftentimes there can be a divide between those two groups. The work of religious literacy is to find a way to speak across that gap, not just so that you can comfort one another in times of trial, the language we might use, but also when you're in the time where grieving is no longer about sitting and witnessing and processing, where your grief moves you to action, where your grief moves you to organizing, to reacting in a proactive way, to making a difference in the world. Being able to speak the different theological languages, being able to understand what our Muslim siblings, what our Hindu siblings, what our Jewish siblings, what their language of action and value in the world is. We have to be able to articulate that for ourselves, first of all. And we have to understand what it means to other folks. So if we're going to do any kind of coalition building to make a positive difference in the world, right? We might say to take church outside of the four walls, right? To be the church out in the world might be the language you use. If we're going to be effective, we have to have a measure of religious literacy. So those two scenarios, right? Where someone is in pain, someone is hurting. If you want to comfort and connect and be there for them as a human being, having that underlying sense of religious literacy is so important. And then if you can move through past or with the pain, the point where you need to do something about it, where you need to pray with your feet to help repair the world, restore the world, make the world a better place, having an understanding of various religious traditions and be able to articulate your own faith tradition as to why you're out there at a protest, doing voting rights activism, something like that. You have to be able to understand what others speak as well. So oftentimes we can become so insulated, especially in UU congregations, where we value individualism and freedom of thought, and the use of scientific reason is one of our principles of Unitarian Universalism. Oftentimes that means turning off your human connect button. Because if someone does not believe what I believe, if someone does not pray in the same way I pray, well, I don't need to have an association with those people. But working on our religious literacy and expanding our mind, our heart, and our spirits to connect with others, that presses that human connect button and makes all of these things possible. To care for one another in times of crisis, to organize together, to build movements, and to spread love in the world. So that's what we talk about in our UU congregations of how can we spread love? I'm often fond of using the term love with a capital L. And if you want to be part of love moving in the world, recognizing how love speaks and how love sounds to different religious traditions, to different people, is of the utmost importance. So we are honored to try and work on our own religious literacy, and I'm glad to know that we're having conversations like these. I'll wrap it up here since my baby has stayed quiet for all this time, so I don't want to push it too far. Thank you.
All right. Give a round of applause to also Reverend Sims. Thank you so much for presenting and speaking. And a couple points that I really thought really echoed through was understanding one another based upon this religious literacy. And I see even using that within your own congregation, and and how it's been beneficial, not just for, like you mentioned, connecting at a coffee hour, but even being able to help them, right? And I think that breeds, I honestly, like, misunderstanding what can happen. It can breed, miscommunication, or even cause further strife, not just within the congregation, but we can see religion or walk of faith to different walk of faith. That's what it breeds, and that's what we've seen over the past hundreds of years. But I do understand, seeing that by us evolving our just what we see as like what we think is true, and being able to study, being able to also be somebody who can be learned of the scripture, of various scriptures. I think that's very evident that you mentioned, because more than misunderstanding, it can be very easy to misunderstand someone too, especially if we don't know what they're going through. And if we can't talk that language, right, how much more will we not be able to help them? So I do appreciate that message as well too, and looking forward to connect with both our wonderful speakers at a future time too. Lots to talk about. But anyways, thank you so much for speaking, Reverend Sims. Likewise, I do want to share and also express just how many insights. I hope not just myself. I don't want to, just because I'm up here. I hope that there's more insights within our audience too. And we'll move right on to our next portion for today, which is actually a time for now our audience members to ask questions to the panelists to present. I'm sure there might be a lot of things and people from different perspectives who joined from this call too, even in our audience. Please, if you have any questions, let's use the raise hand function on Zoom, so I can select you and we can ask, you can go ahead and ask your question. It'll be directed one at a time. Oh, we have one already. Perfect. So please direct the question at the leader in specific. And panelists, try your best to address the question in a brief, concise manner. But we have a little bit of extra time, so if you want to elaborate a little bit further, please do so. All right. So first question, I believe, is coming from, let's see, Carol. And let's hear her question.
Yes, hello. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful, wonderful. So my question is directed towards Imam Sadinaji, but I'm wondering if there is a moment you can recall where religious literacy or knowledge of one's religion was able to help to prevent a misunderstanding.
Mm.
Wonderful. Thank you, Imam Sadin. So we'll move on to our next question. I imagine there will be um, most likely a question for also Reverend Sims. I know usually the leaders that come, there's always a question for each of our leaders, which is pretty astounding. Our audience actually pay attention pretty well, being in the kind of generation that they're in, students, full-time workers. If you were to ask me a couple of years ago to attend an event like this, I was at a totally different place in life. I think everything just would have gone over my head. But luckily, I'm able to participate in a or organization like this. So, okay, let's welcome up our next question. Let's see if we got a raised hand. We do actually. Samantha, and if we can welcome her up, please again state who this is addressed to and the question in specific.
Hello. Before my question, I really would just like to thank you both personally for even sharing so much wisdom. I really appreciate it, and I really do hope we get to hear from you guys again. So my question is actually for both. I wanted to ask, what can I do to even grow my understanding of other religions, and what advice would you guys give that has helped you?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that first, Imam, if you don't mind. Um, so there are a few ways to go about this, depending on what your learning style preference is. For example, we offer this class in our congregation that's called Sacred Text Study, and it's where we look through and read through different sacred texts from different traditions, which is a really good way to go to the source, you might say, to expand your understanding. I would caution you, if you choose to do that, though, that doing so without context and without help from someone for whom that tradition is primary, that can be really challenging. Right. So if you're going to get involved in learning, for example, reading the Quran, right? If you don't come from Islamic tradition, right? It's wonderful to read through the Quran. And if you don't have someone like Imam Sadin, like, you might miss things. So being in relationship with both the sacred text or the cultural aspects of a tradition is a really great way to learn, right? Finding out if there are festivals, holidays being celebrated, especially coming up here in December, where lots of religious traditions celebrate in lots of different ways as it starts to get darker in the Northern Hemisphere. But doing that in relationship with a mentor, a friend, a community of some kind, right? I've often found that communities are so willing to welcome outsiders, quote unquote, into their small groups for people to learn, right? I've gone to different communities, to masjids and to synagogues just to sit in. I've always kind of explained myself very clearly as to who I am and what I'm doing there. And I've always felt very welcomed. So having direct experience by reading through the text yourself, using a commentary on it, but doing so if you get too confused or you feel like it's not making as much sense, trying to find a community that you can plug into to get some information. That's what I would recommend. Mm. Yeah, the pandemic time has been so awful in so many ways, and the this new reliance on technology like this that makes these kind of gatherings possible makes it so that you can knock on that door, as Imam said, from the comfort of your couch and find a community that you might not be able to get to in person, right? So we have people who attend our stuff from Texas, from Canada, from Germany, right? We're here in Philadelphia, and those people couldn't come otherwise. So take advantage of these Zoom opportunities to make those connections.
Well, thank you both for being able to share upon that question, and also for the question. I thought it was a very, very valid question. I think it's nestled around finding the correct source, right? Being able to really learn. I can't tell you how many times I've tried to open like a Buddhist scripture or, like the Bhagavad Gita or something like that. And I don't know what I'm reading. So, and it wasn't until I found, teachers who could explain, understand more for me to understand too. So definitely full first experience within that as well. Thank you both for sharing. And I think we might have, are there any more questions? Oh, looks like we do have one from Lily. Again, state your question and the leader, or if it's for both, please go ahead and share.
Hello. I'd like to ask Reverend Mckinley. So since you shared about your experience learning other religions, would you also be able to share any similarities in teachings or beliefs that you learned that also aligns with your faith?
Yeah. So I grew up, if you can't tell from my accent, I'm not from Philadelphia originally. I grew up in West Texas, where everyone is kind of nominally Christian, right? And I grew up in both the United Methodist Church and the Primitive Baptist Church. So two pretty conservative denominations in that part of the world. And And now I have come out on this other end, serving a Unitarian Universalist congregation, and identify as a, like a liberal progressive Christian. So my encounters with other religious traditions is part of the development of my own faith, right? In learning about the charities in ethical non-compulsion and religion phrases from the Quran, but also about wanting what's best for your brother as you want for yourself, right? Treating others as we want to be treated. That idea of the golden rule or the platinum rule, spanning from Zoroastrianism to Judaism to Christianity to Islam, that's an easy one to point out. But I think what has been more meaningful for me also connects to my second goal of religious literacy, is the ability to organize and to build coalitions and relationships to make the world a better place. That there's often an ethic, even in the dharmic religions like Buddhism and Jainism and Hinduism, even if there's an ethic of non-attachment in your religious tradition, and even if you have vastly different ideas of God, of why bad things happen in the world, the response to those bad things also has a common thread through many religious traditions, that you respond to the hurt in the world. You respond to the wounds in the world in people, and being called to be a healer, because that's what you would want for yourself. That's the underlying ethic I identify with most, that we're called to respond to the pain in ourselves, in the world, right? To seek out suffering and to try and alleviate it if you can. So I see that in a lot of religious traditions, and that's what I gravitate to, right? But that's also kind of what I'm looking for, right? So you might find something that appeals to you in all of those. What I tell my people is, when we say that we draw from other religious traditions, from a living tradition, a wide canon, we mean it. And, right, I didn't grow up going to the masjid. So even though we have folks who identify with Islam and who follow the traditions, I didn't grow up that way. I didn't go to school to be an imam. So I might preach about Islam, but I don't preach the teachings of the Prophet, right? I don't do a Friday service and call it Juma, because that's not my tradition, right? So I might draw inspiration from that, and I might learn from these traditions, but I'm very clear as a UU person, as a Christian person, as a white person, to be frank, that is not mine to just take and then present to my people and say, well, today we're doing Hinduism, right? So there's a difference between learning from and drawing inspiration from, and then like appropriating these cultures, these histories, and these religious traditions. So that's kind of what I tell people, right? You can find things within the faith that speak to you and that help you make meaning in the world. You can find things that call you to alleviate suffering in the world. And it's always important to remember where you come from, for me, what I look like and what my tradition is, and to find ways that are authentic to me to express that like more universal ethic. That's what I always caution my people about, and what I would offer to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Reverend Sims, for being able to answer that question, showing how seamless connections and also strengthen one's faith. And I really do appreciate this time of answering questions. We get to break down, and our audience also get to ask more. However, this will conclude today's webinar. I do thank Imam Sadinaji, Reverend Sims, for being able to join in today, and also for everyone's participation. I really think with the insight we've received today, that we can all have a better understanding of the conditions of, influencing many walks of faith. And if not, at least grabbing a friend, say, hey, if you misunderstand something, come here, let's break down. We have leaders who are actually willing to talk, willing to discuss and break down certain concepts, at least with today, religious literacy. So I hope that it's not just something that is a one-time thing for our audience members here, and even our panelists too. If you ever want to come back, you want to be able to speak and talk about more topics too, we definitely welcome that within, of course, within the constraints of your schedule and time. One being a father, and I'm sure, with the many congregation members you do serve as well. But Religious Freedom USA would definitely like to thank everyone for joining this afternoon. But let's all remember, this work it's not just one day out of the week, right? But we can create a lasting change as we take what we learned today and move forward. And that happens when we gather our minds, raise our voices, and urge the world to uphold what's right. And this officially ends today's webinar. But if the audience would like to find out more information about the panelists, videos be uploaded with permission, of course, from the speakers. Let's give our esteemed panelists one more round of applause. And I know our panelists can't hear them, but I'm sure they'll be clapping in their rooms as necessary. So on behalf, give a big round of applause. I'd like to thank you both for being able to join today. Pleasure meeting y'all. Have a great day.